Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the remote valleys of the Missouri Ozarks, where mist clings to ancient oaks and silence has a weight all its own, there exists a story that few dare to speak aloud. The town of Hollow Creek once stood nestled between the rolling hills of Shannon County, its weathered buildings a testament to frontier determination. Today, if you search for Hollow Creek on any modern map, you'll find nothing but wilderness. According to official records, the settlement was abandoned due to economic hardship following severe drought in the early 1910s. The residents scattered to neighboring communities or westward to new opportunities. A simple, unremarkable fate for one of many failed rural American towns. But those who study the deeper history of the Ozarks know there's more to the story, much more. What truly happened in Hollow Creek during those final months of 1911 has been purposefully obscured. Fragments of truth buried in county archives, newspaper clippings with curious omissions, and the hesitant whispers of descendants who inherited only pieces of a terrible puzzle. This is the account of how an entire community fell under the influence of what locals would later refer to only as the Fellowship, and how, on November 17, 1911, 47 residents vanished without a trace, leaving behind empty homes with tables still set for dinner. Hollow Creek was established in 1867 by veterans returning from the Civil War, seeking isolation and a fresh start in the rugged Ozark wilderness. The settlement grew modestly around a small copper mining operation that provided steady, if unspectacular, income for its residents. By 1900, the town had developed the standard fixtures of rural American life: a general store, a schoolhouse, a church, and approximately 60 permanent residents. County records describe it as a quiet, industrious community of traditional values and limited ambition. The copper mine that had been the town's economic foundation began to falter around 1908, with veins thinning and profits diminishing. According to business ledgers preserved in the Missouri State Archives, mine production had dropped nearly 60% by early 1911, creating financial strain throughout the community. This economic vulnerability may help explain what followed, as desperate circumstances often render people susceptible to promises of salvation, no matter the source. The first unusual reports began appearing in the spring of 1911. Travelers passing through Shannon County noted a strange atmosphere in Hollow Creek. The town's once welcoming demeanor had shifted toward suspicion of outsiders. Windows shuttered as strangers approached. Conversation at the general store grew stilted and guarded. More telling was what happened when darkness fell. Lights burned in the town hall until dawn, and some reported hearing distant, rhythmic chanting carried on the night air. A Missouri Pacific Railroad conductor named Joseph Whitfield made particular note of these changes. Having made monthly supply runs to Hollow Creek for nearly 8 years, he documented his observations in a logbook discovered in 1961 during the renovation of the Winona train depot. His final entry regarding Hollow Creek, dated August 1911, reads, "No longer making scheduled stops at HC Station. Residents refused to receive deliveries directly. All goods now left at Winona Junction. Strange markings on doors. Town sheriff absent 3 consecutive months. Request reassignment to Eastern Route." The markings Whitfield mentioned were described in other accounts as a series of interlocking circles etched into door frames. Not painted, but meticulously carved into the wood itself. Dr. Eleanor Caldwell, an anthropologist from Washington University who studied regional folk practices during the 1960s, noted similarities to ancient symbols found in cave systems throughout the Ozarks, some dating back thousands of years. Her research paper, titled "Symbolic Recurrence in Isolated Communities," was submitted for publication in 1968, but mysteriously withdrawn just before printing. Dr. Caldwell took a sabbatical shortly thereafter and never returned to academic work. In a private letter to a colleague, discovered among her effects after her death in 1975, she wrote, "What happened in Hollow Creek was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. The symbols appear throughout the region's history, always preceding events. I found references in Osage legends to the circles that call to what waits below. I no longer believe it wise to pursue this matter." According to land records housed in the Shannon County Courthouse, a significant change occurred in Hollow Creek's property ownership in early 1911. A man named Thaddius Blackwood purchased the abandoned copper mine on the outskirts of town, along with several adjacent properties. Little is known about Blackwood's origins. The deed of sale lists him as coming from parts east, with no further specifics. What makes this transaction particularly noteworthy is that Blackwood paid entirely in gold coins, unusual for rural Missouri business dealings of that era. A photograph discovered in 1967 in the archives of the Winona Post provides the only known image of Blackwood. A tall, gaunt man with deep-set eyes and an expression of intense focus. The photograph shows him standing before the Hollow Creek mine entrance, surrounded by several town officials. What draws the eye, however, is not Blackwood himself, but the unnatural stillness of those around him, all staring directly at the camera with identical blank expressions. Within weeks of his arrival, Blackwood had established himself as a person of influence in Hollow Creek. County tax records indicate he quickly acquired the town's only hotel, the feed store, and eventually, most troublingly, the church building itself. The local minister, Reverend Samuel Thorne, abruptly departed town in April 1911, leaving behind a one-line resignation letter that simply stated, "I can no longer serve where the light has dimmed." Reverend Thorne was later located in a sanatorium in Illinois, where he had been admitted suffering from what doctors diagnosed as acute religious melancholia. The medical records, accessed by researchers in 1965, note that Thorne refused to discuss Hollow Creek directly, becoming agitated and speaking in fragments when the town was mentioned. The attending physician recorded one coherent statement. He brought something with him, not in his hands, in his mind. It speaks through him, but it is not him. And it hungers for dissolution. A report filed with the Shannon County Sheriff's Office in May 1911 by a cattle trader named William Morley provides further insight into Hollow Creek's transformation. Morley had visited the town regularly for business, but described profound changes during his spring visit. The residents moved differently, as if every step was choreographed. They spoke in similar cadences, using phrases I'd never heard before. Most disturbing was their unwillingness to conduct business outside of town. When I suggested delivering cattle to Springfield buyers, they declined, stating they were bound to the soil of the fellowship. When I inquired about this fellowship, conversations ceased immediately. Morley's report continued with observations about physical changes to the town. The mine that was supposedly depleted now operates day and night. Mechanical sounds echo from its depths, though I saw no new equipment being delivered. The old church has been stripped of all Christian symbols. The cross from the steeple now lies broken behind the building. Inside, the pews have been arranged in concentric circles around a hole in the floorboards. When I asked about this arrangement, Mr. Ellis, who I've known for 7 years, looked at me as if trying to remember who I was and said, "We face each other now, as we will in unity." Morley's report was filed but never investigated. The sheriff at that time, Thomas Buchanan, noted only that rural communities are entitled to their peculiarities and dismissed the concerns. It would later be discovered that Sheriff Buchanan had himself visited Hollow Creek in June of that year and subsequently stopped mentioning the town in any official capacity. When questioned about this by a county commissioner in September 1911, Buchanan reportedly stated, "Hollow Creek governs itself now. They have found their own way." By midsummer 1911, Hollow Creek had effectively isolated itself from neighboring communities. The town's representatives stopped attending county meetings. Mail went uncollected at the regional post office. The school teacher, Miss Abigail Fletcher, who had commuted from Salem, was informed her services would no longer be required, as the town would provide its own education henceforth. Miss Fletcher, concerned about her former pupils, attempted to visit Hollow Creek in July, but was prevented from entering the town by a group of men who blocked the road. In a letter to her sister, preserved in the Salem Historical Society collection, she wrote, "They formed a line across the path, standing so still they might have been statues. Their eyes were vacant, as if looking at something far beyond me. The spokesman, who I recognized as young Thomas Wheeler, told me the children were being prepared for transcendence and required no conventional education. When I insisted on seeing my students, the men began to hum in unison, a sound so discordant and penetrating that it caused physical discomfort. I retreated, I am ashamed to say, and have not found the courage to return." What exactly transpired within Hollow Creek during those summer months remains largely unknown. However, fragments of information have emerged through various sources. A journal belonging to Hannah Morris, wife of the town blacksmith, was discovered in 1963 by hikers exploring the abandoned settlement area. The journal, now housed in the Missouri Historical Society archives, provides disturbing glimpses into daily life under what she calls the new way. Morris writes, "We gather nightly now in the old church, though it is no longer called such. Mr. Blackwood has renamed it the Hall of Unity. The benches have been arranged in concentric circles. We sit for hours listening to his teachings about the ancient ones who once dwelled in these hills. He speaks of powers in the earth beneath us, of voices in the stone. Martin hasn't spoken a word at home for weeks now. He works at his forge all day, producing strange implements for the mining operations. I asked their purpose once. He looked through me as if I weren't there." In another entry, dated July 18, 1911, Morris describes the town's new rituals. "We begin each gathering by drinking the tea Mr. Blackwood prepares. It tastes of earth and something metallic. Afterward, the room seems to breathe. The walls pulse. He speaks, and his words form patterns in the air that I can see. He tells us that individual consciousness is an illusion, a temporary state that causes suffering through separation. Unity awaits beneath. The voice in the copper calls to us. It remembers when we were one with it before form and thought divided us. Some nights I think I can hear it too, humming beneath the floorboards." Morris goes on to detail physical changes in the townspeople. Sarah Wilson's hair has begun to fall out. She speaks of it as shedding the unnecessary. The Thornton children no longer play or laugh, but sit for hours staring at the ground, occasionally nodding as if in conversation with the soil itself. Mr. Blackwood says these are signs of advancement, that we are beginning to resonate with the deeper frequency. Last night, he cut his palm during the ceremony, letting blood drip into the opening in the floor. The droplets never seemed to land. They hung suspended in the darkness below, glowing faintly before dissolving into mist. Later entries become increasingly fragmented and difficult to decipher. Morris describes preparations for something she calls the Great Dissolution scheduled for the autumn equinox. She mentions drinking a bitter tea during gatherings that left participants in a receptive state where they could hear the voices from below. Most disturbing is her casual reference to members who showed reluctance. The Parkers questioned the teaching last night. Today their house stands empty. Mr. Blackwood says they have gone ahead to prepare the way. No one asks what this means. The Morris Journal ends abruptly in early September with a cryptic entry. The chambers beneath are finally cleared. What was sealed away has been found. It speaks through him now. We are to be transformed. I am afraid, yet I cannot leave. When I tried walking to the edge of town yesterday, my legs grew heavy, my thoughts confused. Martin found me wandering in circles at the crossroads, mumbling about circles and depths. Mr. Blackwood says this is normal, that the proximity to the source creates a binding. We are already partly unified with it. November brings the completion. Throughout late summer and early autumn, neighboring communities noted strange activities around Hollow Creek. Farmers reported seeing groups of townspeople walking in perfect formation through the forests at odd hours, carrying torches despite the full daylight. Others described hearing mechanical sounds emanating from the old mine, which had supposedly been depleted years earlier. Most concerning were reports of residents who attempted to leave town being retrieved by groups of blank-faced townsfolk who would appear suddenly along roadways. A hunter named Frederick Sloan reported an unsettling encounter in the woods near Hollow Creek in October 1911. His account, recorded by a Salem newspaper reporter, describes coming across a circle of standing figures in a forest clearing just before dawn. They surrounded something that glowed with a dull copper light. As I watched, they began to sway in unison, bending gradually closer to the central object. The sound they produced was like nothing human, a resonant vibration that made the trees themselves seem to tremble. I must have made some noise, for they all turned at once to look in my direction. Their eyes reflected the copper light like mirrors. I ran and did not stop until I reached my wagon. The only outsider known to have entered Hollow Creek in its final weeks was Dr. James Harrington, a geologist from St. Louis University who had been studying mineral formations in the Ozarks. According to university records, Harrington intended a brief stop in Hollow Creek before continuing his survey work. He sent a telegraph to the university on November 2nd stating, "Fascinating developments in HC, staying to observe unusual mineral specimens. Community engaged in remarkable excavation project. Will report findings in detail upon return." 3 days later, Harrington sent a second, more urgent telegraph, "Remarkable discovery beneath town. Copper formation of unknown composition. Exhibits properties inconsistent with known metallurgical principles. Locals claim it speaks. Blackwood pioneering unusual extraction methods. Request additional equipment and assistant to document findings." The university responded asking for clarification, but received no further communication from Dr. Harrington. A colleague of Harrington's, Dr. Edwin Pierce, later testified that Harrington had mentioned Hollow Creek in correspondence earlier that year. According to Pierce, Harrington had been intrigued by geological anomalies in the region. James wrote to me about unusual copper deposits in Shannon County that exhibited what he called non-random patterning. He described veins of ore that formed perfect geometric shapes, which he considered impossible through natural processes. His last letter mentioned a theoretical connection between certain metal concentrations and electromagnetic phenomena, suggesting that under specific conditions, copper might conduct more than mere electricity. I considered it speculative nonsense at the time. What is known with certainty is that on the night of November 17, 1911, something extraordinary and terrible occurred in Hollow Creek. A severe storm system moved through the Ozarks that evening, with unusually intense lightning reported throughout the region. Residents of Winona, the nearest neighboring town some 15 miles distant, described hearing a sound like the earth itself tearing open, despite the thunder and wind. Weather records from that night, preserved in the National Weather Service archives, document highly unusual meteorological conditions. The storm formed suddenly over Shannon County, appeared to remain stationary for nearly 3 hours, and produced lightning strikes concentrated in an area of approximately 1 square mile, directly over Hollow Creek. The barometric pressure dropped to levels typically associated with major hurricanes, and electromagnetic disturbances disrupted telegraph communications across 3 counties. The following morning, a mail carrier named Edward Collins made his weekly attempt to deliver accumulated post to Hollow Creek. His signed statement, preserved in county records, provides the first documentation of the town's fate. I approached as usual, expecting no one to meet me, as had been the case for months. As I crested the ridge overlooking the valley, I observed an unusual stillness. No smoke rose from any chimney despite the cold morning. The town appeared intact from a distance, yet utterly abandoned. Upon closer inspection, I found doors standing open, lamps still burning with oil nearly depleted. Food sat on tables, partially consumed. Every resident was gone. No signs of violence or struggle were evident. Most disturbing were the floors of the town hall, which had been torn up to reveal a large hole descending into darkness. The stench rising from this opening caused my horse to rear and refuse to approach closer. I departed immediately to report the situation. Collins later added details omitted from his official statement. In a private letter to his brother, discovered in 1962, he wrote, "What I told the authorities was the truth, but not the whole truth. Some things I saw that morning defy rational explanation. The hole beneath the town hall was not crude or roughly made. Its edges were perfectly smooth, as if cut through solid wood and earth with impossible precision. It descended at an angle that seemed to shift when viewed from different positions. Most disturbing were the footprints around it, hundreds of them, all leading into the opening, none coming out. And though I reported no signs of violence, I did not mention the walls of the town hall. Every surface was covered with those interlocking circles, carved so densely that no original wood remained visible, and they seemed to move when not looked at directly, rearranging themselves in my peripheral vision. The subsequent investigation was cursory at best. Sheriff's deputies documented the abandoned buildings and noted the unusual mine shaft that had been opened beneath the town hall. However, no attempt was made to explore the opening, which one deputy described as descending at an unnatural angle and emanating a foul miasma. The official report concluded that the townspeople had likely evacuated due to some mining accident, though this explanation failed to account for the half-eaten meals and personal belongings left behind. One deputy, Benjamin Hayes, attempted to descend into the shaft beneath the town hall, but returned immediately, visibly shaken. His account, buried in the appendix of the official report, states only, "The opening does not behave as it should. Things move in the darkness below. The walls are not solid. I heard voices calling my name in the depths, speaking in the voices of people I knew to be dead. I recommend sealing this hole without further investigation." Within weeks, the county had closed its investigation. The land was reclaimed by the state due to unpaid taxes, and Hollow Creek was essentially erased from official concern. Most disturbing was the lack of inquiry into the fate of 47 missing residents. No bodies were ever recovered. No former Hollow Creek residents ever appeared in records elsewhere. They had simply vanished. In the decades that followed, the story of Hollow Creek receded into local legend, occasionally mentioned in hushed tones, but rarely investigated seriously. The land where the town once stood gradually returned to wilderness, though locals noted that vegetation grew strangely in the area, twisted into unusual shapes, with a tendency toward circular patterns visible from higher elevations. For decades, the story of Hollow Creek remained just another obscure footnote in Ozark history, occasionally mentioned as a curiosity but never thoroughly examined. This changed in 1957, when Arnold Pearson, a spelunker exploring cave systems near the former settlement, made a disturbing discovery. Deep within a previously unmapped cavern, Pearson found what he initially thought was a natural rock formation, but upon closer inspection revealed itself to be a perfect circle of seated human figures, their forms calcified and preserved by mineral-rich water that had flowed over them for decades. In Pearson's written account, submitted to the Missouri Speleological Survey, he described the scene in detail. The chamber was approximately 30 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling from which a copper-colored mineral seeped, forming stalactites of unusual geometric regularity. Seated in a perfect circle were what appeared to be human figures, though their proportions seemed subtly wrong. Limbs slightly too long, torsos too narrow. They were completely calcified, transformed into a substance that resembled copper more than stone. Each figure sat with hands resting on the knees of the figures to either side, creating an unbroken circuit. Most disturbing were their expressions, faces upturned toward the center of the circle, mouths open in what might have been ecstasy or terror. At the center of the circle was a depression in the floor, perfectly circular, descending into darkness, too deep for my lantern to penetrate. The air in this chamber was unusually warm and seemed to vibrate at a frequency just below audibility. Pearson reported his finding to authorities, but when a team returned to investigate, They could not locate the passage he had described. Some suggested Pearson had fabricated the story, while others speculated he had succumbed to cave gas hallucinations. Pearson maintained the truth of his account until his death in 1963, adding the detail that each calcified figure wore an expression of what he described as rapturous terror. In the months before his death, Pearson claimed to be visited regularly by figures who stand in the corners of rooms, visible only when not directly observed. His family reported finding circular symbols carved into the walls of his home, though Pearson denied creating them. Medical records indicate he died of heart failure, though the attending physician noted unusual copper-colored staining on his fingers and around his mouth that could not be removed. In 1965, a historian named Margaret Holloway began compiling all available records related to Hollow Creek for what she planned as a comprehensive study of the incident. Her research took her through county archives, newspaper morgues, and personal interviews with elderly residents who still remembered stories about the vanished town. As her investigation progressed, Holloway reported increasing difficulties. Records went missing after she had reviewed them. Interview subjects recanted their statements, and she described being followed by men who stand too still. In correspondence with a colleague at the University of Missouri, Holloway wrote, "There appears to be an active effort to suppress information about Hollow Creek. Archives that were available to me one week are reported destroyed or misplaced the next. People who spoke freely about family stories suddenly claim no knowledge of the events. Most disturbing are the phone calls. Silence on the line, broken only by what sounds like distant rhythmic humming. I've begun to notice circular patterns in everyday objects, coffee rings on my desk that I don't remember making, arrangements of books that seem to shift overnight. I don't believe in the supernatural, but I'm increasingly convinced that what happened in Hollow Creek in 1911 has tendrils that reach into the present." Holloway's work culminated in a manuscript titled The Fellowship, Dissolution and Disappearance in the Ozarks, which she submitted to the University of Missouri Press in early 1968. The manuscript was rejected, with the publisher citing concerns about factual accuracy and potential libel. All copies were reportedly returned to Holloway. 3 weeks later, Holloway's house outside Jefferson City burned to the ground, reportedly due to faulty wiring. Fire officials noted the unusual intensity of the blaze, which left nothing intact, not even metal fixtures. A colleague who had read portions of the manuscript later recalled that Holloway had connected Hollow Creek to similar incidents throughout the Ozarks, dating back to pre-colonial times. She had identified 7 other communities that had experienced similar patterns: the arrival of a charismatic outsider, increasing isolation, reports of rituals centered around caves or mines, and ultimately disappearance. The oldest case she documented involved a Shawnee settlement that vanished in 1783, leaving behind only circular stone arrangements and carved symbols matching those described in Hollow Creek. The most recent development in the Hollow Creek mystery came in 1969, when construction workers clearing land for a new highway near the former settlement site uncovered a sealed metal box containing a single item: a journal belonging to Thaddius Blackwood himself. The journal, now housed in a private collection and rarely made available to researchers, contains mostly indecipherable writings, symbols similar to those described on Hollow Creek door frames, and scattered English passages that provide disturbing context for what may have occurred. The construction foreman who discovered the box, Harold Jenkins, later reported unusual circumstances surrounding the find. According to his statement, preserved in the Shannon County Historical Society records, the box was uncovered after a series of equipment malfunctions near a particular limestone outcropping. Every time we approached that spot, machines would fail. 3 bulldozers experienced identical electrical failures, despite being different makes and models. The air around the outcropping seemed to waver, like heat distortion, but even on cold mornings. When we finally broke through the rock manually, we found the box in a small hollow that looked artificially created. The inside surfaces were carved with those same circular symbols. Most strange was that the box was warm to the touch despite being encased in rock, and seemed to vibrate slightly when held. One legible entry in Blackwood's journal reads, "The ancients knew the truth of dissolution. Physical form is merely a temporary vessel. Beneath the earth they wait in formless unity. The copper was never the objective. It was what the mining revealed, the chamber of convergence. The symbols are keys. The community understands now. Soon we will transcend the limitations of individual consciousness. The boundary thins. They speak through the stone, through me." November brings the final alignment. Another passage, dated September 1911, provides insight into Blackwood's background. "The university rejected my findings as impossible. They cannot conceive of consciousness existing outside organic matter, cannot accept that what we perceive as inanimate might simply operate on frequencies beyond our limited senses. I found the first evidence in Romania, in mines, dating to the Bronze Age. The same patterns appeared in Bolivia, in China, in Wales, always in connection with copper deposits of unusual purity, always with the same symbols carved by different cultures separated by thousands of miles and years, always with legends of those who joined with the earth or became one with the deep places. Hollow Creek sits above the largest convergence point I have yet discovered. The resonance here is almost audible, even to untrained ears. The locals feel it without understanding. Their receptivity is why I chose this place. A final entry, dated November 17th, simply states, "The way is opened. We go now to join what has always been waiting. Those who come seeking will find only emptiness. We leave nothing behind but vessels no longer needed." The subsequent pages contain nothing but increasingly frantic repetitions of the circular symbols, growing more distorted until they become unrecognizable scrawls that cover entire pages, as if written in desperate haste or altered consciousness. Researchers who have handled Blackwood's journal report unusual phenomena associated with extended exposure to its contents. Dr. She. Leon Friedman, who transcribed portions of the text in 1971, documented experiencing vivid dreams of descending spiral passages and a vast chamber where copper light pulsed in rhythm with a distant humming. After 3 weeks of working with the journal, Friedman reported that the circular symbols began appearing in his own handwriting unconsciously, leading him to abandon the project. In his final research notes, he wrote, "The symbols appear to function as a kind of conceptual virus, altering patterns of thought through repeated exposure. I find myself drawn to caves, to depths, to the idea of dissolution. I understand now why the Hollow Creek incident was suppressed. Some knowledge is not merely dangerous, it is infectious." Missouri. State geologists who have studied the region note that the cave system beneath Shannon County is among the most extensive and least mapped in the country. Some passages descend to depths exceeding 400 feet, where they connect to underground waterways that flow for miles through absolute darkness. What might be contained in those unplumbed depths remains unknown. A geological survey attempted in 1975 was abandoned after multiple equipment failures and the disappearance of a graduate student who had ventured into a newly discovered passage near the former Hollow Creek site. The student's body was never recovered, though his final recorded radio transmission mentioned copper light growing stronger and voices in the rock. Today, the location where Hollow Creek once stood has been reclaimed by forest. No structures remain visible. The entrance to the mine that Thaddius Blackwood purchased has collapsed, sealed by time and the elements. Hikers occasionally report unusual phenomena in the area: unexplained temperature drops, the sensation of being watched, and most commonly, the sound of rhythmic chanting just at the threshold of hearing, which ceases when directly approached. Local wildlife behaves strangely in the vicinity, with birds avoiding flight over the area and larger mammals detouring around it despite no visible barriers. Electronic equipment frequently malfunctions. Compasses spin uselessly, and in recent years, GPS devices have displayed unusual errors, coordinates that shift inexplicably, or lead to locations miles from the intended destination. In 1968, the Missouri Department of Conservation designated the area as a wildlife preserve, prohibiting development or excavation. Some speculate this designation was meant to prevent further investigation rather than to protect natural resources. Whatever secrets lie beneath the quiet forest floor remain undisturbed. Dr. Catherine Marshall, a geophysicist who conducted a non-invasive ground survey of the area in 1987, detected anomalies inconsistent with natural formations. Her report, published in the Journal of Applied Geophysics, notes, subsurface imaging reveals a network of chambers at depths between 200–400 feet that appear to have been artificially modified. Most notable is a large circular chamber approximately 30 feet in diameter directly beneath the former town center. This chamber exhibits unusual properties, including electromagnetic readings significantly above background levels and temperature elevations not consistent with geothermal activity in the region. Most puzzling is the apparent density of the chamber walls, which the data suggests is composed of material more similar to metal than to surrounding stone. Marshall's research funding was not renewed, and she subsequently accepted a position at a university in Australia, effectively ending her investigation of the Hollow Creek anomalies. In private correspondence with colleagues, she admitted to experiencing unsettling dreams during her time researching the site, consistently featuring circular patterns that seemed to move when not directly observed, and a humming voice that spoke without words. Perhaps most unsettling is a detail found in Hannah Morris's journal that historians have struggled to explain. In an entry dated nearly 3 months before the disappearance, she wrote, "Mr. Blackwood spoke again of dissolution today. He said we would not truly be gone, but instead would become watchful guardians of the threshold. He promised that long after our transformation, we would persist in the awareness of these hills, sensing those who pass through, occasionally making ourselves known to the receptive. We will become the whispers in the Ozarks silence," he said. "We will be the unease that follows travelers on lonely roads, the shadows that move at the corner of vision, the watchers who stand just beyond the firelight." I asked if this should frighten us. He smiled in that way that never reaches his eyes and said, "Fear is merely the recognition of transformation's approach. Embrace it as the beginning of understanding." The case of Hollow Creek and its fellowship remains officially classified as an unsolved mass disappearance. No definitive explanation has ever been established for what happened to the 47 residents who vanished on that November night in 1911. Their names are preserved in county census records, their property deeds filed in courthouse archives, but of the people themselves, no trace has ever been found. Local folklore has incorporated elements of the Hollow Creek incident into regional mythology. Ozark storytellers speak of the watchers in the woods who stand motionless among trees at twilight. They tell of the humming caves, where no spelunker will venture, places where the rock itself seems to vibrate with something like consciousness. Elders warn children not to draw circles in the dirt, lest they call attention from below. A particularly persistent story involves travelers who become lost in the remote valleys of Shannon County. According to these tales, disoriented hikers or campers sometimes encounter a helpful stranger, typically described as tall and gaunt with deep-set eyes, who offers to guide them to safety. Those who follow reportedly find themselves walking in circles, eventually arriving at small clearings where stone formations create perfect circles. At this point, the guide allegedly reveals a face behind the face and extends an invitation to join the deeper unity. Those who refuse find their way out of the woods with no memory of how they navigated to safety. Those who accept are never seen again. While such stories can be dismissed as regional folklore, they contain elements consistent with the documented aspects of the Hollow Creek incident, the circular imagery, the themes of unity and dissolution, and the presence of a guide figure resembling descriptions of Thaddius Blackwood. Those who have studied this case most deeply suggest that the truth of Hollow Creek lies not in what can be proven, but but in what can be felt, in that instinctive human recognition that some boundaries were never meant to be crossed, some knowledge never meant to be reclaimed from darkness. Perhaps the real mystery is not what happened to the people of Hollow Creek, but what they might have become. For visitors to the Ozarks, particularly those who find themselves on remote roads as twilight descends, local guides offer a piece of practical advice. If you feel a sudden weight of attention in seemingly empty woods, if whispers seem to follow your steps, though no one is visible, if you glimpse figures standing perfectly still among distant trees, do not stop. Do not investigate. Above all, if you hear your name called in a voice that sounds almost, but not quite human, do not answer. Some say the fellowship of Hollow Creek is still there, transformed but watchful, waiting in the depths below the hills or in the spaces between moments. Not gone, merely changed into something that occasionally reaches across the boundary of perception to touch the world of form they once inhabited. In 1961, a hunter from Springfield became lost in the area during an early snowstorm. After being rescued 3 days later, suffering from exposure and dehydration, he described finding the ruins of a small town where he sought shelter for the night. According to his account, as darkness fell, he heard footsteps moving in perfect unison outside the collapsed building where he had made camp. The footsteps circled until dawn, never entering but never moving away. When asked why he hadn't called out to what he assumed were fellow hunters or rescuers, the man replied, because they weren't walking on the ground. The sound came from below the earth. The official record states that no structures remained in the area by 1961, and the hunter's experience was attributed to hypothermia-induced hallucination. Yet his description of the ruined buildings matched precisely the layout of Hollow Creek as documented in the last survey conducted in 1910. More disturbing still, without prompting or prior knowledge of the town's history, he drew a series of interlocking circles that match those described in historical accounts of Hollow Creek doorways. A final note of historical interest. In August 1911, 3 months before the disappearance, the town of Hollow Creek ordered an unusually large quantity of copper wire from a supplier in St. Louis. The shipment, documented in the supplier's ledger, was delivered but never paid for. When asked about the purpose of so much wire, the town council member who placed the order reportedly said it was for establishing a connection. What kind of connection they sought, and whether they found it in those final days of autumn 1911, remains perhaps the most unsettling question of all. For as you drive the winding roads of Shannon County, as the sun dips below the ancient hills and shadows lengthen across the pavement, you might find yourself wondering, are you truly alone in these woods? Or are you being watched by those who learned at terrible cost that some forms of knowledge transform rather than enlighten, that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again? Listen carefully as the wind moves through the oak leaves. That sound, almost like whispered words. Is it merely the natural music of these hills? Or something else entirely, something that remembers being human once, long ago, before it became part of a greater unity beneath the waiting earth? Perhaps it's better not to know. Perhaps some mysteries serve us better by remaining unsolved, some histories by remaining buried. For those with the wisdom to recognize it, the true story of Hollow Creek can be read in the gooseflesh that rises on your arms when you pass certain unmarked places in the Ozark wilderness, in the instinctive acceleration of your heartbeat when darkness falls too quickly among the trees. In 1967, a soil analysis conducted by the Missouri Department of Agriculture revealed unusual mineral content in the area where Hollow Creek once stood. The report, initially intended for agricultural planning, noted extremely high concentrations of copper and several trace elements typically associated with deep geological formations rather than surface soil. More puzzling were the perfectly circular patterns of mineral distribution, with concentric rings of increasing concentration leading to a central point directly above where the town hall had once stood. The chemical composition matched no known natural process of mineral dispersion. The analysis also found organic compounds that defied categorization, complex carbon structures with properties similar to both mineral and biological material. The chemist who performed the analysis, Dr. Richard Winters, wrote in his private notes, later discovered among his effects, "The molecular structures appear to be hybridized in a way I've never encountered, partly mineral, partly organic, as if the boundary between living and non-living matter had somehow dissolved. Most disturbing is the way these compounds react in solution, arranging themselves into circular patterns, regardless of container shape or agitation. When viewed under microscope, the movement appears almost purposeful." Dr. Winters requested funding for further research, but was denied. He continued independent studies until his unexpected resignation from the department in 1968. Former colleagues reported that in his final weeks of employment, Winters became increasingly preoccupied with circular patterns, drawing them compulsively on any available surface, and speaking of voices in the molecular vibrations. His current whereabouts are unknown. A peculiar incident in 1964 further contributed to the Hollow Creek mythos. A family picnicking near the former town site reported that their 6-year-old son wandered off and was missing for approximately 20 minutes. When found, the boy was standing motionless in a small clearing, staring at the ground. According to his parents' account, filed with the Shannon County Sheriff's Office, the child spoke of meeting the Circle people who lived under the ground and talked without mouths. For several weeks afterward, the boy reportedly drew the same image repeatedly, concentric circles surrounding a central opening, and asked when he could go below to join the Unity child. Psychologists attributed the experience to an overactive imagination, combined with possible exposure to local folklore. However, the family relocated to Kansas shortly thereafter, reporting that they felt unwelcome in the woods and experienced strange dreams of descending spirals. The boy's drawings, included in the original case file, were removed at some point prior to 1970 and have never been located. The fellowship discovered something in the depths beneath their town, something that offered transcendence at the cost of humanity. Whether what awaited them was enlightenment or horror depends, perhaps, on which side of the threshold you stand, and whether you believe some boundaries were established not to limit us, but to protect us from what waits, patiently, on the other side. Accounts from elderly residents of Shannon County, collected by folklorists in the 1950s, suggest that unusual phenomena associated with the Hollow Creek area predated the town itself. Indigenous Osage stories referenced a place called the Speaking Ground, where the earth was said to whisper to those who pressed their ears to the soil. Early settlers reportedly avoided the valley where Hollow Creek would eventually be built, claiming it caused livestock to behave erratically and people to experience vivid, troubling dreams of depths and dissolution. A trader's journal from 1840, preserved in the Missouri Historical Society archives, describes passing through the uninhabited valley that would later become Hollow Creek. A most disagreeable sensation overcame our party as we made camp in the narrow vale. Though the location offered water and shelter, not one among us slept soundly. All reported dreams of descending into the earth, of voices emanating from stone, of a presence that observed us from below. Our horses refused to graze and stood trembling through the night. We departed at first light, though our intended route would have been better served by remaining. Some places seemed to reject human presence, or perhaps to hunger for it in ways best left unexplored. This historical context raises the possibility that Thaddius Blackwood did not bring something to Hollow Creek, but rather discovered what had always been there, a presence of unknown nature that had influenced the region for centuries before finding in Blackwood a means of more direct communion with the surface world. In 1966, a team from the United States Geological Survey conducted electromagnetic surveys throughout the Ozarks as part of a mineral resource assessment. Their equipment detected an anomaly centered on the former Hollow Creek site, a low-frequency resonance emanating from deep underground, producing what the team leader described as a continuous carrier wave modulated by irregular pulses. The pattern defied conventional geological explanation, as it appeared to originate from depths beyond their equipment's normal range, and exhibited characteristics more commonly associated with artificial transmissions than natural phenomena. The USGS team established a monitoring station to record the signal but abandoned the project. After 3 weeks, when multiple team members reported experiencing the same dream, descending a spiral staircase carved from living rock, approaching a chamber where seated figures surrounded a pulsing copper light. The monitoring equipment was removed, and the anomaly was listed in official reports simply as unexplained subsurface activity, possibly related to unusual mineral deposits. No further investigation was conducted. So if you find yourself in the remote valleys of Shannon County and come across a clearing where nothing grows despite the fertile soil around it, walk quietly and do not linger. Some absences have a presence all their own, and some silences speak volumes to those unfortunate enough to truly listen. The story of Hollow Creek teaches us that the most profound horrors are not those that destroy the body, but those that transform the soul into something unrecognizable, something that no longer belongs to the world of light and air, but to deeper, darker realms where ancient appetites wait in patient silence. In 1967, during construction of a fire access road several miles from the former Hollow Creek site, workers uncovered a sealed glass jar containing a letter dated November 16, 1911, the day before the town's disappearance. The letter, signed by Hannah Morris, read in part, "To whoever finds this, what happens tomorrow is not against our will, though I cannot say it is entirely by it either." We have been changed by our proximity to what dwells below. Our thoughts are increasingly not our own. We dream the same dreams now, of copper light and unity beyond individual form. Mr. Blackwood calls it transcendence. Some among us call it surrender. I do not know the right word for allowing yourself to be absorbed into something vaster and older than humanity. I leave this record not as a warning, for those drawn to the circles will not heed it, but as testimony that we who were Hollow Creek understood, at the end, what we were becoming. Whether this transformation is evolution or dissolution, I cannot say. The boundary between rapture and terror has dissolved along with so many other boundaries. We go below willingly, yet with trembling. We go as many before us have gone. We go to join what has always waited in the deep places. The authenticity of this letter has been questioned by skeptics who suggest it may be a later fabrication meant to enhance local folklore. Yet handwriting analysis conducted by the Missouri State Police in 1968 confirmed its consistency with known samples of Hannah Morris's writing from county deed records. The letter was stored in the Shannon County Historical Society archive until 1972, when it disappeared during a cataloging project. Only photographs remain, for in the end, the most terrifying aspect of the Hollow Creek disappearance is not that 47 people vanished without a trace. It's the possibility that in some form we cannot comprehend, they never left at all. The forest that now covers the former town site grows in patterns visible only from above, concentric circles radiating outward from a central point. Local pilots have noted this phenomenon, but attribute it to unusual soil conditions. Few have connected it to similar patterns found carved into the doorframes of Hollow Creek homes over a century ago. In the decades since the disappearance, dozens of hikers, hunters, and campers have reported unusual experiences in the area. Watches that stop at precisely 11:17, the exact time of the November disappearance. Unexplained copper-colored lights seen between trees at twilight. And most commonly, the sensation of being observed by something that remains just out of sight. A survey team in 1980 reported that their compasses behaved erratically within a perfect circle approximately 1 mile in diameter, centered on the former town site. Inside this boundary, magnetic north appeared to shift toward a central point, regardless of the observer's position. Electronic equipment suffered power drains and occasional failure. Most disturbing were audio recordings made within the circle, which, when played back, contained a faint background hum punctuated by what sound analysts described as patterns consistent with human speech, but at frequencies and rhythms outside normal parameters. The team's final report recommended against further development or exploration of the area, citing environmental anomalies unsuitable for conventional use. The recommendation was adopted by state authorities, effectively sealing off the region from official scrutiny. Today, the area remains among the least visited sections of the Ozark Forest, not through any formal restriction, but through what locals describe as a natural aversion that causes most travelers to choose other routes without conscious decision. As this investigation draws to a close, we are left with more questions than answers. What was the true nature of Thaddius Blackwood and the influence he exerted over Hollow Creek? What did the town discover beneath its foundations, in those copper-lined chambers, deep in the ancient stone? And perhaps most troubling, if the residents did not die but were transformed, as multiple accounts suggest, what form might their consciousness take now, over a century later? The circular patterns continue to appear throughout the region, in crop formations that baffle farmers, in unexplained arrangements of stones in forest clearings, in the unconscious doodles of schoolchildren who have never heard the name Hollow Creek. The low, rhythmic humming still emanates from certain cave systems, audible only at specific times and to specific individuals. And occasionally, travelers still report encounters with unnaturally tall, gaunt figures who offer to guide them through the woods, speaking in oddly formal cadences about unity and dissolution, about the illusory nature of individual consciousness, about the peace that waits below. The story of Hollow Creek and its fellowship reminds us that some mysteries resist conventional explanation, that the boundary between the known and unknown remains permeable, and that beneath the surface of our familiar world may lie realities that operate according to principles we cannot, perhaps should not, comprehend. If you find yourself drawn to these circular patterns, if you begin to hear the humming in your dreams, if the concepts of unity and dissolution begin to seem not frightening but appealing, remember Hannah Morris's final written words, "We go below willingly, yet with trembling, for the unity offered by what waits beneath the Ozarks may indeed be a form of transcendence, or it may be the ultimate dissolution of everything that makes us human, a surrender to something that hungers for consciousness but exists without the limitations of individual form or moral constraint. The choice, should you ever find yourself at that threshold, will be yours alone to make. Choose wisely. For as the people of Hollow Creek discovered on that November night in 1911, some transformations cannot be undone, some thresholds cannot be recrossed, and some forms of unity come at the cost of everything we once were. The patterns are there for those with eyes to see them. The invitation remains open for those with ears to hear it. The circles continue to appear, doorways to something that waits with geological patience for those willing to surrender the boundaries of self to a deeper, darker unity. Listen carefully to the silence of the Ozark forests. That subtle vibration beneath the threshold of normal hearing, is it merely the wind through ancient trees, or something else, something that remembers being human once before it became part of what waits below?